My name is Marielle Dunne. I'm 43 years old. I was a real estate attorney for 18 years until I realized the people I trusted most were building an empire on my silence. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Not the air, just the space between people. The space where truth gets stretched, contorted, and finally buried under polished shoes and practiced smiles. My father sat on the far right, his hands folded neatly across a designer briefcase. My brother Rowan leaned back, arms crossed, smirking. A small audience filled the back of the room. Journalists, law students, former clients pretending to be curious. I stood alone at the plaintiff's table, calm, still, until he opened his mouth. "She's just a failed lawyer," Rowan shouted across the courtroom. His voice echoed like it belonged in a cheap drama. The judge didn't flinch. But I didn't look at him. I didn't look at my father either. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim black folder. No theatrics. No speeches. Just one quiet motion, deliberate final. I slid the file across the table straight into the judge's hands. He opened it. 2 pages and his brow twitched. 4 pages, his jaw clenched. At page 6, he dropped his pen, leaned forward, and said 4 words that cracked the room in half. "Lock the doors. Now!" The bailiffs froze for a moment, just long enough to make everyone's blood chill before they moved. SWAT entered seconds later, not running, but marching, like this had been coordinated in advance. Because it had. Heavy boots thundered across the floor, weapons holstered but visible. The sound alone silenced every whisper in the courtroom. Rowan's chair scraped backward. He stood halfway, then stopped, eyes darting from the judge to the folder still in his hand. To me. Dad didn't move, didn't blink, but his knuckles turned white against the handle of his briefcase. The lead SWAT officer whispered something into his mic. Another one posted at the exit. A third stood behind my father's chair. Rowan's voice, so loud minutes ago, had disappeared. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I had rehearsed this in my mind for months, not for the performance, but for the silence. This silence. The one that says you've been caught and the law is no longer behind you, it's in front of you and it's closing in. For years they dismissed me. Called me too careful, too methodical, said I didn't have the sharp instinct for big wins, that I wasn't aggressive enough. But I didn't need aggression. I needed evidence. And time. And now, here in this room full of marble betrayal and artificial lighting, I had both. The judge turned toward me, eyes narrowed. "Ms. Dunne." "How long have you had this?" I spoke for the first time. Long enough to know that timing is everything. Rowan opened his mouth again, something between a denial and a plea, but no words came out. He took a step toward the table and a SWAT officer raised one hand. That was enough. Rowan froze. My father closed his eyes. The judge signaled to the clerk. "Court is adjourned until we process the sealed evidence. No one leaves this room until further notice. Officers escort Mr. Rowan Dunne and Mr. Gregory Dunne into holding for preliminary questioning." I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I had waited too long for this moment to ruin it with satisfaction. Justice isn't about celebration. It's about balance, restoration. And sometimes it begins with one file sliding across a table. I wasn't always like this. I used to believe that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and followed the rules, life would repay you in kind. I was the first in our family to go to law school. I studied until my fingers bled from typing, until my eyes blurred from reading depositions. I graduated top of my class, my father's voice ringing in my ear. "Law is dignity, Marielle." "It's not a job, it's a legacy." I believed him. I joined the family's growing real estate business right after graduation. Drafted every contract, reviewed every acquisition, protected every asset like it was mine. Because I thought it was. I thought we were building something together. And we were. Until my mother died. After her funeral, things began to shift. My name was quietly removed from emails. Clients were redirected to Rowan. I was too emotional, they said. Take time off. Grieve properly. Then came the call from the county registrar. The Saginaw house, my mother's house, the one she told me she was leaving in my name, had been transferred to a company I'd never heard of, Loden Pines LLC. Signed, notarized, processed. I wasn't even asked. I went to my father. He said it was a mistake. I went to Rowan. He said nothing at all, just smirked. I tried to believe it was just bad timing. A clerical error. Something they'd fix, of course, once they realized. But they never fixed it. Because it wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. And I was never supposed to notice. But I did. And from that moment forward, I stopped being the dutiful daughter. I became something else entirely. 3 weeks after my mother's funeral, I returned to the house in Saginaw. It wasn't for nostalgia. It was paperwork, estate administration, probate court, the mechanical, sterile process of closing someone's life down to a list of assets and signatures. And yet, as I pulled up to the house, the hydrangeas overgrown the gate, slightly leaning, I felt something like breath hitch in my chest. This house was supposed to be the only thing left untouched. It had been in my mother's name since 1999. She inherited it from her aunt who never married, never moved, never let the wallpaper peel. The mortgage was long paid off. My mother loved this house the way some people love old books, quietly, protectively, without needing to show it off. 2 years ago, she told me while slicing pears in the kitchen, "When I go, this place is yours." Not because of law, because I want you to feel like something is still standing when the rest of the world shifts. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I assumed the paperwork would reflect her words. I brought my laptop estate files and my mother's original will, which I had helped her update 6 months before she passed. It clearly designated the Saginaw house to me no ambiguity, no shared ownership, no legal room to reinterpret. I had even notarized it with a colleague present, though not as the official witness. I sat at the old dining table, cleared a space between unopened mail and an untouched vase of dry roses, and connected to the county records portal. The file loaded slower than usual. And then I saw it, a second will, filed 5 weeks before my mother died. In this one, the house wasn't left to me. It was transferred to a holding company, Loden Pines LLC, registered in a different state, with no clear signatory, aside from a corporate trustee. No mention of me. No reasoning, just replaced. I opened the PDF. My mother's signature was at the bottom, Marielle Dunne. But something in my stomach tightened the second I saw it. Her E curved too wide. The crossbar on the T and Dunne leaned downward. Her pen never did that. I had watched her sign birthday cards for decades. That wasn't her hand. Still, I checked the timestamp, dated exactly 5 weeks before her death. But 5 weeks before she died, my mother was unconscious. She had been in the ICU since mid-January, sedated tubes in her mouth, a heart monitor, beeping steadily in the dark hours. I had slept in the chair beside her for 4 nights. I remembered counting the seconds between breaths. She hadn't spoken, eaten, or held a pen. She couldn't have signed anything, not legally, not physically, not without help or manipulation. I checked the notary stamp on the new will. It was issued from a mobile notary service out of Flint. I didn't recognize the name. It wasn't the notary I used for the original will. There were no witness signatures, just one seal, slanted, sloppy. I felt my pulse quicken, not anger, not grief, but something colder, a calculation, a legal instinct. Something's wrong. I scrolled down and opened the property records. The deed for the house had been transferred out of my mother's name, not to me, but to Loden Pines 2 days after she passed away. Signed by a trustee I'd never heard of. Verified by the same notary from the suspicious will. I looked at the timeline again. Will filed 5 weeks before death. Death, February 17th. Property transfer, February 19th. No probate, no court hearing. Just a smooth, quiet handoff processed electronically. I felt a chill, not from the drafty windows, but from the efficiency of it all. It had been planned. Not hastily, not sloppily, but precisely. As I closed the laptop, I heard the faint creak of floorboards upstairs. A reflex. even though I knew no one else was home. For a split second, I remembered being 13, tiptoeing into the attic to find Christmas decorations, and catching Mom sitting alone on the floor reading letters from her sister. She looked up, eyes red but kind, and said, "Some things you have to keep quiet until you're ready." I wondered what she had kept quiet before she died, and more importantly, who else knew it needed to stay that way. Because the house that once felt like a promise now smelled like a cover-up, and I was no longer the grieving daughter. I was the only person in that room willing to ask who rewrote my mother's final words. The next morning, I drove straight to my father's office. He had always kept the same corner suite at Dunne Holdings' oak-paneled walls, a miniature globe bar cart, and a painting of some nameless mountain hanging behind his leather chair. That chair used to feel like a throne when I was little. Now it looked more like a barricade. He looked up from his desk when I entered. Calm, blank. "You don't make appointments anymore?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I make accusations." His lips twitched. Not a smile, not quite a smirk, just something cold surfacing behind the wrinkles. "I saw the revised will," I said, keeping my voice even. "And the deed transfer. It was filed 2 days after Mom died." He nodded once. "I know. It wasn't her signature." "Your mother changed her mind," he said. "She wanted things to be equal between you and Rowan. She told me we just didn't get a chance to talk about it as a family." I stepped closer. "I wrote the original will, Dad. I was there when she reviewed every line. She said she wanted the Saginaw house to go to me, not because I needed it, but because I understood what it meant to her." He sighed, leaning back. And maybe she realized Rowan deserved something too. Maybe she changed. She couldn't hold a pen, Dad. "You know that." She was sedated, on a feeding tube. He didn't argue. He just stared at me, then reached for a glass of water. Sipped once. The silence between us stretched like elastic tight, but not yet snapping. She couldn't have signed anything I continued. Not in the state she was in. Which means someone else did it. Someone forged her name. My father didn't blink. "That's a serious claim." "I'm a serious person," I said. "I didn't come here for comfort. I came here for truth." He put the glass down deliberately, as though measuring the weight of his response. "Families don't survive legal wars," he said. "I hope you know that." I stared at him for a long moment. Not with anger, but with an ache I hadn't admitted yet. It wasn't just betrayal. It was displacement. I wasn't just being erased. I was being overwritten, turned into a cautionary tale inside my own bloodline. I left without another word. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Rowan's condo. He answered the door in gym clothes, earbuds still dangling from his collar. I hadn't seen him since the funeral. "Wow," he said, leaning on the doorframe. "Look who's doing pop-ins now." I didn't waste time. "Tell me you didn't do it." He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. That was the part that got me. No confusion, no denial. He just grinned. "You're the lawyer, Marielle. Can't you figure it out?" I felt the ground shift under my feet just slightly. "You forged Mom's signature," I said quietly. "Used a mobile notary, probably fake credentials, to file a backdated will and push the deed through before I could even get to court." Rowan shrugged. "You think I have that kind of access?" "You had my tools," I said. "I built the estate software we all used." "You had admin rights. You knew her passwords. You knew how to move things without raising flags." Still smiling, he shook his head. "You're good, you know that. You could have been brilliant if you hadn't always played it so clean." There it was, the confession without the confession, the guilt without the apology. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I stood there looking at my brother, the boy I used to cover for in high school, the man I had helped rebuild his credit after a DUI, the one I thought I was saving when I vouched for him at a licensing board hearing. He was using the access I had once given him to cut me out of my own legacy. "You used me," I said. "No," he replied. "I learned from you." That line stuck in my throat long after I walked away. I had taught him how to protect assets, how to draft contracts, how to structure a holding company. And in the end, he used every trick I had shared with him not to build something, but to delete me from the story. But what he didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I didn't learn law to make threats. I learned it to keep receipts. And I had just started collecting. I started digging into Loden Pines LLC the same night I left Rowan's condo. At first, I thought I'd hit a dead end. The company was clean on paper, registered in Montana, listed as a domestic limited liability company, all boxes checked. But everything felt too neat, too fast. I knew what real paperwork looked like, and this had the scent of something made to look real. I pulled the articles of organization. The listed manager, Martha Elkins, age 82, currently residing in a long-term care facility in Billings, Montana. I stared at the screen. Why would an elderly woman in assisted living be managing a holding company tied to a house in Michigan? I looked up the address attached to the registration. It wasn't a law office. It was a P.O. box. That's when I knew I was looking at a shell. A carefully built shell meant to hide something. Or someone. I cross-referenced the registration signature with known business records and notary logs. The name that appeared as the organizer of the company jumped out at me like a ghost I thought I'd buried years ago. Sasha Whitman. The same Sasha who once interned under me when I was heading estate planning compliance at Faber & Lawson. The same Sasha who I reported for falsifying billing hours and fabricating client consent forms. The same Sasha who nearly lost her license because of me. Apparently, she didn't. Not only was she still practicing, she was now the name behind the formation of a company that had taken possession of my mother's house. I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no version of this where Sasha's involvement was accidental. It wasn't a coincidence. She had inserted herself into my family's affairs for one reason: revenge. But the part that twisted deeper came minutes later. I found her LinkedIn profile open, curated too perfect and underpersonal. There it was. In a long-term relationship with R.D. Rowan Dunne, my brother. It felt like a slap across the face. I had vouched for Rowan when no one else would. I had walked into hearings, courtrooms, and closed-door meetings to protect him. I defended his mistakes with words I now regretted more than any ruling I'd ever lost. And he had turned around and partnered with a woman who had once threatened my bar license, now weaponizing her knowledge of estate law to erase me from my own bloodline. I checked the filing date again. The company had been created 7 weeks before my mother died, which meant they had this plan in place before she passed. Not out of grief, not out of desperation, but strategy. This wasn't about taking what was theirs. It was about keeping me out. I went deeper, cross-checked emails, dug through archived messages from 2 years ago, stuff I never thought I'd need again. And there it was. One message from my mother dated just weeks before her hospitalization. I'm not comfortable with Rowan's new girlfriend. She keeps asking questions about the house, about my accounts. I told him to keep her out of it, but I don't think he listens. I hadn't seen it then, I hadn't wanted to. But now I couldn't unsee it. Sasha didn't just draft a company, she designed a pipeline, a funnel to move assets without my knowledge under the guise of equal distribution, all while using a woman too old and too ill to question it as the company's front. And if they had gone that far, if they were willing to file fake companies and falsify signatures, what else were they hiding? I scrolled back to the property ledger and opened the financial activity tab. 3 withdrawals, all within 48 hours of the deed transfer, each labeled management fee, each routed through Loden Pines into a second entity I didn't recognize yet. I copied the account number. I would track it down later. Right now, all I could feel was the precise nature of the exclusion. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't personal in the petty sense. It was engineered. They didn't just want the house. They wanted me nowhere near the table. And they had built an entire paper world to make sure I stayed out. But I know how paper works. It rips, it burns, it folds, and in my hands, it talks. I didn't call the police. I didn't file a claim, not yet. Instead, I called Natalie Klein. It had been over a decade since we last spoke. Back then, we were on opposite sides of a merger dispute that dragged on for 9 months and nearly cost both firms their biggest clients. She was ruthless, brilliant, precise to a fault. I hated her, and I respected her more than anyone else I'd ever worked against. Now she was working freelance private forensic financial investigations, mostly for hedge funds and litigation attorneys. No firm, no politics, just facts. I sent her a brief email. Client me, target my family, fraud suspected, shell company involved. I need you quiet, fast, and thorough. She replied within an hour. One condition I don't sugarcoat. Perfect, I typed back. We met at a small cafe near Ann Arbor. Natalie wore all black, her gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She hadn't aged much, still sharp-eyed and coiled like a blade. I handed her a folder with everything I had: the new will deed transfers, Loden Pines documents, email logs, property registry timestamps. She flipped through them in silence. 5 minutes in, she looked up. This isn't just inheritance fraud. This is money laundering, low tier, but structured. I leaned forward. How sure are you? She pulled out her tablet, tapped through a few screens, and showed me a spreadsheet she'd already begun compiling. The funds from the sale of your mother's house didn't just sit in Loden Pines. They moved. She pointed to a transfer labeled MGMT DIS BLP15, dated 2 days after the deed was processed. $10,000 to a company called Tidefall Ventures, registered in the Cayman Islands. Then 2 more transfers, 30 and 50 grand, to separate entities in Luxembourg and Belize, all within 72 hours. I stared at the screen. She continued. Then the money bounces again, ends up at Dunne Holdings, booked as consulting fees for estate advisement. That's your father's company, right? I nodded slowly. She tapped once more. Same routing numbers. He signed the receipts himself. I exhaled. A long, slow release. I wasn't shocked. I was just hollow. Natalie studied me. You okay? I nodded. I've been preparing to see this for weeks, but seeing it and knowing it are different things. I've seen worse, she said, but not often from families this well-trained. Your brother and Sasha knew how to layer it, but they got sloppy with the notary signature. She handed me another sheet. It was the will again, this time overlaid with a forensic handwriting comparison. The Elaine Dunne signature on the new will was traced, not written. There's microscopic inconsistency in the pen pressure too uniform. No natural variation. It's not hers. Can you prove that in court? I asked. I can prove it anywhere, she said. We moved to a quieter table in the corner. She brought out her laptop and opened up a case model of flowchart already in progress. Names, accounts, filing dates, a diagram of intent. There's a pattern here, Natalie said. This wasn't an opportunistic grab. It was built over time. They formed Loden Pines before your mother entered the hospital. Sasha set up bank accounts in her name while she was still alive but sedated. They backdated the filings and relied on the assumption that no one would dig this deep. They underestimated how much law, I remember I said. No, Natalie said. They underestimated how much law you're willing to use when it's your own blood. That landed differently. She was right. Up until now, I'd still been trying to separate what I knew as a daughter from what I knew as a lawyer. I thought if I could stay grounded, keep the emotion out, I wouldn't lose more than I already had. But this wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about the fact that they were using my mother's death, my trust, and my silence as a legal camouflage. I had spent my entire adult life cleaning up other people's messes, untangling hostile takeovers, correcting forged signatures, and freezing offshore funds with 24 hours notice. And now I was watching that same toolkit being turned against me. No, I wasn't watching, I was stepping in. I want to file a civil claim, I said. Probate fraud, forgery. I want to freeze the Loden Pines account and trace every shell company tied to it. Natalie nodded. You'll also need a digital trail. Internal communication asset control, anything they touched from your mother's accounts to Dunne Holdings. I have email backups, I said. Call logs, password timestamps. Rowan used my estate software. I still have access to legacy admin. Good, she said, because we're going to bury them in their own metadata. She closed the laptop and stared at me. You ready to go to war with your family? I thought of the silence after my mother died, the way no one had looked me in the eye, the way my father's words had turned from guidance to warnings, the smirk on Rowan's face when he said I was too clean to survive this game. Yes, I said. Natalie leaned back, satisfied. Then let's turn the lights on. Let's make them explain everything they hoped no one would ever see. As I walked out into the crisp evening air, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for the truth they had built a system to bury. And I was done pretending to be the daughter. Now I was the one building the case. And I knew exactly how to win it. Yeah, after meeting with Natalie, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept looping through transactions, forged signatures, and all the moments I had been told to stay calm, let it go, trust the process. I got out of bed just after midnight, poured cold coffee from a glass jar, sat on the floor with an old external hard drive I hadn't touched in years, one my mother gave me back when I helped her digitize old family photos. At the time, I thought it was sentimental, a way to preserve birthdays, graduations, Sunday mornings in the backyard. But as I plugged it in, the folder structure told me this wasn't just about memories. One directory stood out: if anything happens. I hesitated just for a second before clicking. Inside were 6 files, all video, all dated within the last 3 months of her life. I opened the first one, and there she was sitting at the kitchen table wearing that faded lavender sweater I'd seen 100 times. Her face was pale, tired, but her eyes were focused. "Hi, honey," she said, staring straight into the camera. "I'm not recording this because I'm scared. I'm recording this because I'm tired of being quiet." I leaned closer. "I know you're going to look into everything once I'm gone. That's who you are. That's why I'm proud of you. And that's why I'm leaving these." She paused, took a shaky breath. "I don't trust your father anymore. I haven't for a while. And Rowan, he's not the boy you remember. He's smart, but he's also slippery. Always watching what your father wants, never what's right." She picked up a small envelope and held it toward the camera. "In here is a statement from March. Bank account ending in 2947. There's a withdrawal I didn't authorize, a large one. And when I asked your father, he said it was a mistake. But it wasn't. I know it wasn't." I paused the video, opened a new window, pulled up my archived financials, searched for the account, found it. On March 12th, there was a $47,500 wire labeled Estate Management Prep, routed to a financial advisory firm I'd never heard of. The firm had shut down 6 weeks later. I resumed the video. I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want you to worry. But if you're seeing this, I need you to know I was aware something was happening. I didn't know how deep it went. I thought maybe it would stop if I stayed quiet." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "You were always the strong one, Marielle. Not just smart, honest. You see things people don't. And I need you to look, carefully, because they've already started changing things. I found files missing from my folder. Letters I wrote gone. When I asked Rowan, he said maybe I misplaced them. But I didn't." She looked down for a second, then back up. "If anything happens to me, don't let them tell you you're crazy. You're not. You never were. And if this is the only way I can help, then so be it." The screen froze as the video ended. I sat back staring at the monitor. The room felt colder than before. I opened the next video. This time she was in bed, propped up by pillows, her breathing a little slower. "I asked your father last night about the Saginaw house. He changed the subject. I pressed him. He said, that house should go to someone who knows how to manage it. I asked what that meant. He told me not to worry. I am worried, Marielle, not for me, for you." She coughed, dry, restrained, and took a sip of water. "You love that house. Not because it's valuable, but because it's home, because it has weight. They know that, and they'll use it to cut you out. I can feel it. I'm not being paranoid, I'm being a mother. She reached over and clicked off the camera. The screen went black. I didn't cry. I couldn't. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet, logged the account, the withdrawal, the name of the advisory firm, the matching time codes on the metadata. Then I opened the third video. She didn't speak this time, just looked at the camera for 15 seconds, as if trying to imprint something deeper than words. I stared back. In that silence, I finally understood. She didn't leave me clues because she was afraid. She left them because she knew one day I'd be the only one left who still cared about the truth. And now, the truth had a voice. Mine. There's a kind of nausea that comes when you realize the tools you once built to protect your family were later used to erase your place in it. That's what I felt the morning I traced the notary seal. It had been stamped on the forged will, the one that gave Loden Pines the house. At first glance, it looked valid, date aligned, location correct, but something about it felt off. The seal was too crisp, too evenly pressed, almost mechanical. Real notaries don't stamp that clean, not on paper that old. I ran the registration number through the Michigan Secretary of State's database. The result came back fast. Revoked, license inactive since 2021. It was 2023. I dug deeper. The notary's name was Eldon Greaves, suspended for falsifying signatures on auto financing contracts, specifically for predatory lease buyouts. He had been fined, publicly reprimanded, and barred from notarizing any legal document in the state. And yet here he was, on my mother's final will, giving it legal credibility. I looked up the listed notary address. The building had been sold and repurposed into a smoothie shop 2 years ago. That meant the document wasn't just illegal, it was impossible. I sat at my desk, hands flat on the wood heart, beating like a gavel against my ribs. Someone had gone out of their way to create a piece of fiction that could pass for law. And they had counted on me never checking the margins. They forgot who wrote the margins. I opened the estate software. Cypress Trust, a platform I had helped build during my 4th year at Dunne Holdings. It had been my baby, a centralized permission-based system for estate execution. Every contract, trust deed, and inheritance document filtered through a traceable chain of custody. Clean, elegant, secure. Except Rowan had full administrative access. I had given it to him myself 5 years ago when he wanted to learn the business. At the time, I was trying to be a mentor, a good sister, a bridge. Now I was staring at the access logs. He hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. His user ID rdunne88 was the one that approved the metadata changes. He uploaded the forged will. He replaced the document tagged Final E-Will Saginaw O'Rig with one labeled V-Final Family Revised. He didn't delete the original, he just buried it, renamed it, moved it into a dormant folder tied to a terminated trust. Sloppy. Or maybe he thought I'd never look. I retrieved both versions and ran a document comparison. The forged one had 3 changes. The house was no longer designated to me. Loden Pines was inserted as the new beneficiary. The clause protecting my oversight rights as executor had been removed entirely. All changed within 4 minutes of each other. I traced the IP log to a location just outside Traverse City, Sasha's registered home office. So that's how they did it. Rowan used my software to stage a transfer. Sasha drafted the language and scrubbed the fingerprints. And my father, who once told me my legal mind was the family's greatest asset, signed the advisory agreement that funneled the first payments from the sale into Dunne Holdings books. Every piece of the puzzle was laid with a precision I should have admired. But all I felt was the hollow weight of knowing that I had built the system they used to lock me out. It wasn't just betrayal. It was architecture. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the silence spread. They weren't even trying to destroy me. They were just trying to delete me, make me administratively inconvenient. An outdated folder, a line of code that didn't serve their new structure. But here's the thing they didn't understand. When I built Cypress Trust, I didn't just write logic. I embedded fail-safes, redundancies, audit trails, because I believed even back then that law should remember what people want to forget. I reopened the software, navigated to the hidden audit layer. There it was, a system log, every revision, every deleted clause, every timestamp, Rowan's name, Sasha's IP, my father's approval signature. It was all there. They hadn't deleted me. They had documented their own conspiracy. They thought they were erasing me from the legacy. What they didn't realize was that I was the legacy. And I was about to remind them, one file at a time. I had built my case brick by brick, document by document. But in the end, it wasn't paper that gave them away. It was pixels. Natalie called me early on a Tuesday. Her voice was clipped tight. "Check your inbox," she said. "You're going to want to see this." I didn't wait. The video loaded slowly, as if the universe itself was savoring the moment. It came from a security camera mounted above a diner across the street, from the former notary office, the one listed on the forged will. That building we knew had been shut down for over 2 years. But the diner was still open, still running cameras. The footage was grainy but clear enough. March 3rd, 10:42 a.m. Rowan stepped into frame. Same jacket I'd seen him wear to Sunday brunch. Same phone he never left behind. But it wasn't the notary's building he walked into. It was the print shop 2 doors down. He carried a flash drive in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. Glanced over his shoulder. Went inside. 12 minutes later, he walked back out. Same jacket, same phone, no flash drive. Natalie froze the frame. "Want to bet what was on that drive I didn't speak?" She continued. I called the print shop. They couldn't tell me anything without a subpoena, but they did say they had an old USB left in a drawer that no one claimed. I filed the motion. Judge approved it this morning. I blinked. "Wait, are you saying we have it?" She smiled through the phone. "Come to my office." By noon, we had it plugged in. The drive was dusty, unlabeled, nearly forgotten. Inside 2 folders, one titled Elaine D., Legal Docs, and the other Templates. The first held 3 high-resolution scans of my mother's signature taken from old mortgage filings, bank authorizations, and medical consent forms. The second held something worse, a software application, GraphiSign Pro, an illegal signature simulation tool. It allowed users to create animated strokes that mimicked real handwriting down to pressure curves and hesitation pauses. It was banned in nearly every legal context. But here, it was running on an unregistered copy access just once March 3rd, 9:13 a.m. Rowan had scanned Mom's old signatures, used the software to generate a new one, then printed it onto the forged will. Not pasted, not traced, programmed. It was meticulous and criminal. "This is federal," Natalie said. "Forgery with simulation software, unauthorized use of medical data, interstate intent to defraud. We're no longer in civil territory." I stared at the screen. My own brother, a man who couldn't balance a checkbook in college, had become so confident in his deception that he'd used digital forgery to rewrite a legacy. And he left it all on a drive. Natalie leaned back in her chair. "This is the nail, Marielle." I didn't respond. I was still staring at the simulation file, watching a digital hand recreate my mother's name over and over each version, slightly different one with a tremble one without. I imagined him sitting there in Sasha's apartment tweaking the settings, choosing which stroke looked more natural. I remembered the way he used to watch me sign documents as a kid, how he'd ask, "Why do you make the M like that?" And I'd say, "Because Mom does." He learned too well, and then used it to erase her truth. Natalie's voice broke the silence. "I've got the chain of custody started. We'll timestamp everything secure backups and prepare the submission. Once this gets in front of the judge, there's no walking it back." I nodded slowly. "File the motion. But don't tell them we have it." Her brow lifted. "Why? Because they still think they're ahead," I said. "Let them talk, let them lie, let them present forged confidence while the real truth sits in our pocket." She smirked. "I knew I liked you for a reason." That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the video of Rowan entering the print shop again and again. It wasn't guilt I was feeling. It was something older, deeper, humiliation. I had built the estate platform, created the system that logged every digital move. I had installed the audit function. I had taught him how to upload documents, how to redact metadata, how to track access history so he could one day inherit with clarity. And he used that knowledge to simulate our mother's hand and to cut mine out of the picture entirely. But now, the very thing he relied on technology had turned against him. A print shop's camera, a forgotten USB, a banned piece of software. None of it could be torn up or rewritten. None of it could be argued away. It was no longer just my word against theirs. Now the evidence had eyes, and those eyes had already started watching. The morning I filed the lawsuits, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, methodical, civil and criminal, both petitions submitted within 15 minutes of each other. One to the probate division, the other to the state's Financial Crimes Bureau. No warning, no courtesy calls, no letters slipped under my father's door, no text to Rowan, no signals. They would learn the way I did, all at once. Natalie and I spent 4 nights building the master file. It wasn't just a binder of evidence, it was a roadmap of betrayal, each page layered over the last, until the full picture emerged. The forged signature, the illegal notarization, the dummy LLC, the offshore routing chain, the doctored, the video files, the security footage, the simulation software, the USB. And then there was the piece I held until the very end, my mother's voice naming the account, naming her doubts, naming me. When it was all compiled, we printed everything twice. One set for the court, one set locked in a safe under Natalie's name. The date of the hearing arrived quietly. It was a crisp morning, pale sun overhead. I dressed in gray, no colors, no jewelry. Just a black leather portfolio in my hand, and a calm I couldn't quite explain in my chest. The courthouse steps felt steeper than I remembered. Inside, people moved like clock hands, measured, distracted, unaware. Rowan was already there when I entered the courtroom. He wore a suit. He looked polished, confident. Sasha wasn't beside him, but her fingerprints were all over the folders he clutched. I caught the glance he threw at me, half smirk, half scorn. I didn't return it. My father walked in next. Slower, shoulders back but eyes dulled. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table and laid the portfolio down. I didn't open it yet. The judge entered. Roll call began. And then it started. Natalie, seated behind me, handed forward the first set of exhibits. The bailiff collected them. The court clerk distributed copies. The judge began reading. For a full minute, there was silence. Only the turning of pages. Then he looked up. "Counselor Dunne," he said, "do you wish to address the court before I continue?" I rose. "I do, Your Honor," I said, "but not yet. The documents speak first." He nodded, and so they did. He flipped through the forensic handwriting report, then the banking statements, the shell company diagram, the timeline overlay showing my mother's hospitalization against the so-called signing date, the photo stills from the diner security footage, the licensing history of the notary, the flagged software analysis, the voice file transcript, each one landing like a hammer. Rowan's fingers fidgeted. My father sat very still. Natalie leaned in behind me and whispered, "We're already in." And we were. The foundation had shifted. The courtroom had changed. This was no longer a family dispute. It was something harder, colder, a forensic dissection of fraud and moral collapse. I didn't gloat. I didn't shake. I had brought only one file. But inside that file was every silence they thought would protect them. Every lie they thought would dissolve in time. Every false signature, every darkened room, every secret meeting. It was all there, documented, dated, and finally delivered. Rowan was smirking when I stepped forward. He thought I brought a bluff, that this would be another of my silent appeals to morality, some last-minute plea for decency he'd already rehearsed a smirk for. My father. He didn't even look at me. He was on his phone pretending to check emails, voice low like he was negotiating something important. But I knew better. It was a performance, a final grasp at dignity before everything unraveled. I stood before the court. The air was stale with anticipation. "Your Honor, I said I have one file. It contains all exhibits. I request you review the top summary page first." I handed it to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Rowan was still smiling, so sure of his insulation, of Sasha's redrafting, of my silence. The judge didn't say a word as he flipped the cover. He scanned the page. His eyes stopped mid-line. Then he looked up. "Counselor," he said, his voice suddenly louder, echoing sharp, "where is this data sourced from direct subpoenaed transfers from United Federal Savings?" I said, "Combined with original notary license records and digital metadata extracted from Exhibit 9. Rowan blinked. The judge tapped his pen twice on the desk, then said flatly, "Seal the courtroom. Now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. But everyone heard it like thunder. The bailiff immediately stepped toward the doors. With a loud click, they were locked. One of the guards spoke into a radio. And then through the side entrance, 4 members of the Financial Crime SWAT division entered. Boots, vests, shields. People gasped. Rowan's smirk vanished. "Wait, what?" he stuttered, standing halfway, knocking over a water glass. He turned toward the exit, then toward his lawyer, then to my father, who still refused to meet his eyes. The judge didn't stop. "Bring in the digital forensics team," he continued, flipping the page. "I see preliminary cause for federal wire fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and obstruction." Rowan was frozen. It was the first time I had seen him speechless. My father finally stood. He didn't say anything either. He simply turned away, as if he could walk out of the room, as if turning his back could erase what had already been revealed. But the doors didn't open. I remained exactly where I was, still in gray, still holding no notes, still calm. The judge now addressed the bailiff directly. "Take Mr. Rowan Dunne into temporary custody pending review. Notify financial oversight." "Sir?" the bailiff asked, surprised. "Probable cause is satisfied," the judge said. "The evidence is extensive and digitally time-stamped. This is no longer a civil matter. Federal jurisdiction applies." 2 SWAT officers approached Rowan. He stepped back once, then again. But there was nowhere left to go. He was escorted, no cuffs yet, but not as a guest. My father finally sat back down, hands folded, mouth thin, eyes cast downward. I didn't speak again. I didn't gloat, because the truth had already spoken. The file I slid forward wasn't just paper. It was the voice of my mother silenced too soon. It was the software I once built, now used to dismantle the lies coded through it. It was every late night I'd studied while they schemed behind locked doors. It was every piece of me they thought they had erased, all lined up, signed, sealed, and now delivered. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. "Real estate heir accused of multi-state fraud. Dunne family's legacy unravels in courtroom shocker. Daughter exposes father-brother in federal scandal." Some got the details wrong. Most speculated more than they reported. But it didn't matter. The story had broken. The mask had cracked. The calls started almost immediately. Former business associates of my father, men who used to toast champagne in our garden, now left vague voicemails. "Hope you're holding up," or "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I didn't call back. By noon, 2 companies had pulled out of pending land development deals with Dunne Group Holdings. Another had filed to delay escrow. A longtime supplier canceled future deliveries. I knew this wasn't justice yet. It was just the first drop before the flood. The court had issued preliminary freezes on company accounts, and investigators were digging. But I'd learned enough from my years in law to know things move slow, especially when money is involved. Still, something else started happening. Something quieter. When I stopped for coffee on Main Street, the barista, a woman younger than me, didn't say anything. Just gave me my cup, nodded once, and handed back my change with both hands. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not curiosity. Recognition. Later, when I walked past the old bookshop my mom loved, Mr. Heller, the owner, stepped outside. He didn't say my name, didn't mention the news. He just looked at me, gave a small nod, and went back inside. The same man who once gently asked if I was doing okay after Mom's funeral now seemed to say with that one gesture, "We knew. We all knew. Just didn't know what to do about it." There were no hugs, no crowds, no applause, just small acknowledgments scattered like seeds, a quiet letting go of disbelief. My father didn't return home that day. Rowan had been transferred to a federal holding facility by early afternoon. His lawyer made a statement claiming misunderstandings and technical errors. But the footage, the forged files, and the offshore money trail left little room for interpretation. Still, one man did go on television, an old law school friend of my father's, claiming the charges were exaggerated. He sat across from a cable news anchor and said, "Edward Dunne is a respectable man. He's built businesses, provided jobs. His daughter has always been complicated." I didn't react. I didn't need to. The anchor simply asked, "Then why was the courtroom sealed?" The man hesitated, smiled, mumbled something about legal process. But the damage had been done. I wasn't just some bitter daughter airing grievances anymore. I was the one holding receipts. But the people of Saginaw, they didn't need television to believe. They'd lived next to us, shopped beside us, watched our lawn parties from their porches. And over the years, they must have seen cracks I didn't. Maybe they didn't say anything because they didn't know how. Or maybe they were waiting for me to be ready, to see it myself. Either way, they were watching now. And instead of turning away, they nodded. It started with a blog post. Anonymous. Sharp. Heavy with implication. Daughter sues her own father and brother, all for a house. Within hours, it was everywhere. Facebook groups, Reddit threads, the comment section on every local news article about the trial. Some accused me of betrayal, of seeking attention, of dragging family business into public view. Who sues their own dad? This woman must be bitter. Just sell the house and move on. She'll regret this when her father is gone. Others stood up. Clearer, sharper, more grounded. If your family forges documents, steals from you, and lies, they stopped being family. She didn't sue them for the house, she sued them for the fraud. Being related doesn't mean being above the law. It wasn't a wave, it was a split. Half the internet seemed ready to burn me in the court of public opinion. The other half, they offered a quiet hand. People who had been through something similar. People who saw their own silence reflected in mine. I didn't reply to any of it. Not the supporters. Not the critics. Especially not the ones who said I should forgive and forget. Because forgiveness for them meant silence. It meant pretending nothing happened. It meant handing over a piece of my mother's memory for the sake of optics. It meant letting a crime slide just because the criminal had my last name. Natalie sent me a screenshot of the thread. Just one sentence written beneath a dozen conflicting opinions. Justice doesn't need to be voted on. That was all she said. That was all I needed. I kept scrolling. There was a woman who commented, "My brother forged my dad's signature and took everything." I didn't sue. I should have. Her comment had 20 likes. Another person replied, "My mom was erased from her own parents' will because she refused to go into the family business. We just found out. 30 years too late." The stories kept coming, one after another, whispers, then full voices. And I realized something. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't even about my father or Rowan anymore. It was about the pattern. About how so many women are told to be grateful, to let things go, to preserve peace, even when the cost is truth. About how silence is painted as strength. But strength is knowing when not to be silent. So, no, I didn't answer the blog post. I didn't try to justify myself. Because when you're standing in the truth, you don't owe anyone an explanation for not kneeling in a lie. Let the internet argue. Let strangers debate my intentions. The court had my evidence. The truth had my voice. And I had already paid the price. Winning in court didn't feel like winning. When the judge ruled in my favor, restoring my legal claim to the house in Saginaw, it should have felt like closure, or at least relief. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. That house was never just property. It was where my mother raised me, where she whispered bedtime stories and let me sleep on her lap when thunderstorms rattled the windows. It was where we carved pumpkins, stitched curtains, and folded dreams into drawers we no longer opened. But it was also where Rowan forged papers, where my father signed away my place in the family, where my name had been erased quietly, legally, permanently. So no, I didn't go back. I signed one more set of documents, this time fully aware of every line, and transferred ownership of the house to a nonprofit organization, a shelter for women recovering from financial abuse. They called and asked if I wanted the plaque to include my name. I said no. I didn't want to be remembered for what I'd lost. I wanted that house to become something no one could ever take from someone again, a place of rebuilding, not remembering. I drove past it one last time. The porch had been repainted. The curtains were drawn open. A small garden had been planted where the rose bushes used to be replaced with sunflowers. My mother would have liked that. As I drove away, I didn't cry. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. That house had held my childhood, my grief, and my fight. But now it would hold someone else's healing. That was enough for me. Months passed. I didn't return to court. I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't post online about justice or redemption. I didn't even update my professional profile. But somehow the story still moved. Quietly. Through word of mouth. Through court transcripts passed around late at night by law students. Through whispers between junior associates over coffee. One evening, I got a message on my old email, the one I hadn't used since law school. It was from a final-year student at the University of Michigan. She wrote, "Hi, Ms. Dunne. I read your case file in class today. I've never seen anyone submit evidence that clean, that thorough, that silent. I don't know how you did it, but you made me want to be the kind of lawyer who makes people uncomfortable for the right reasons." I reread that message 3 times, then once more. Not because I needed the validation, but because I needed to believe that someone somewhere understood what the silence had cost me. I typed back, "When someone takes your dignity, don't try to reclaim it with words. Reclaim it with evidence. No emojis, no fluff. Just the one thing I had learned too late." A minute later, I deleted the email. Not because it didn't matter, but because I didn't need to keep it. I already knew who I was. I was never a failed lawyer. I was never just a daughter. I was the woman who stood still when others tried to erase her. And I left behind more than a courtroom victory. I left a blueprint. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them remember me however they choose. But let the women who come after me know one thing. You don't have to burn everything to rise. You just have to stop asking permission to stand. I hadn't planned to attend the legal symposium. It was something I used to avoid, rooms full of men with polished shoes and sharper opinions where justice was often a matter of negotiation rather than conviction. But Natalie had nudged me to go. "You've earned your place in those rooms," she said. So I went. I wore a simple navy suit, no name badge. I sat in the back. I listened. And I didn't raise my hand once. During the break, as I stepped out to grab coffee, I heard a voice behind me. A voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Marielle." I turned. Professor Hartman, the one who taught commercial litigation. The one who had once told me flatly that I was better suited for family law because I lacked the aggression needed for the real courts. He hadn't changed much, same thick glasses, same neutral tone tie. He took one look at me and said without preamble, "I used to think you didn't have the sharpness to survive commercial law, but you have something rarer, moral clarity, inner justice. That wins in the long run." There was no apology in his voice, but there didn't need to be. I smiled. "Thank you, Professor." That was all. I didn't need to list the accolades. I didn't need to mention the court case that had reshaped probate procedure in Michigan. I didn't need to prove anything, not anymore. As I left the room, I noticed a small group gathered just outside the exit. They weren't applauding. They weren't filming. They weren't even smiling. They simply stood, young lawyers, students, clerks, and nodded, one after another. And I nodded back. Not out of pride, not out of recognition, but because I finally understood something. I was no longer Gregory Dunne's daughter. I was no longer the girl who was told she lacked bite, the girl whose place in her own family was forged in betrayal and fire. I was Marielle Dunne, the woman who did not play their game and still won, not by being louder, not by being crueler, but by being relentless in truth. That was my legacy now, and that was enough. Before we say goodbye, I have a small question. Where are you listening from? Is it a quiet morning with coffee cooling beside you, or a restless night where stories like mine keep you company? Wherever you are, I want to thank you for walking this path with me. If my story resonated with something inside you, a memory, a silence, a wound that once had no name, know that you're not alone. Please consider subscribing, not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of a community that believes in truth, healing, and second chances. I fought for justice, not for revenge, not for applause, but to remind the world that some things still matter. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or nearly erased, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care. I'll see you in the next story.